I don't know why I enjoy themed environments that include a lot of water like aquariums, but that extends to theme parks and the occasional ride that simulates diving as well. Recently, I covered 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at the Magic Kingdom, and I've always been fascinated by the Tokyo Disney Sea version as well, which is notable because it only simulates the idea of going underwater rather than actually doing so. However, when I was doing research on an unrelated topic for creepy dinosaur rides that became popular in the 80s and 90s, I stumbled across a small tidbit of information that led to something interesting. When I was researching Universe and Dare Energy, a dinosaur ride that opened at Europa Park in 1994, I discovered that the ride system had actually been reused from a defunct attraction that had existed within Miropolis. This was the first theme park to open in France in 1987, and is notable through how it was based specifically on French literature and fairy tales. While the park initially opened with some attractions that were well themed for the 80s, it quickly added traveling fair rides over the next few years, which seemed to work against the park in achieving financial success. However, it did have some notable attractions with animatronics, like a show that featured Leonardo da Vinci that told you about his life. It appears that other animatronics depicted French fairy tales, and hey look, there's even a reskinned Rockafire explosion band from Creative Engineering that used to be a staple of Showbiz Pizza Place. The park also contained 2 dark rides, the first of which was located in this massive structure that depicted Gargantua, a mischievous giant that was popular in French folktales. I'll discuss that a bit later, but I also want to point you to a video by George Browning, who covers the fascinating but short-lived history of Miropolis in depth. You can tell that he spent quite a lot of time doing research for what was a fascinating video to watch, so I'm really encouraging you to check that out if you haven't already. However, my real interest is in the second dark ride, which translated from French, was known as the City of Dis, Journey Under the Sea. This ride is absolutely bizarre, and the more I dug, the more I realized that this is pure Lovecraftian horror, making for one of the most unique attractions I've ever seen. So, pun intended, let's dive right in. From a visual perspective, this ride is incredibly intriguing to me, but there's one problem. It's poorly documented, and there's very little context for what is going on in here. With this being the case, there's going to be a lot of guesswork as I describe the content of the ride to you, but I'm going to do my best with the little information that is out there. First, I want to start with the premise and ask, what exactly is the City of Dis? From my research, it comes from folktales in Brittany, a region of France settled by Bretons, who are considered a Celtic nation. There are many stories that tell the history of Is, which is the Celtic pronunciation, an island city that sunk into the sea off the coast of Brittany, which reminds me quite a bit of Atlantis. One of the more prominent stories tells that the island city was ruled by Gradalon the Great, who lived in a lavish palace. Gradalon was a pious king, but his daughter, named Dahut, was the cause of the city sinking into the sea. In some versions of the story, she takes her father's key to open the city gates for her lover, but in a drunken episode, accidentally opens a gate to the levee, which floods the city and causes it to sink. In other versions, she is a wicked sorceress who floods the city on purpose, and as her and her father escape on horse as the water floods in, an advisor to the king, a saint, calls out to him to fling the demon from the horse to save himself, which he does as he escapes to the mainland. Other legends surrounding the city then elaborate, sometimes telling of how Dahut became a malicious water spirit who haunts the site, or how a perpetual storm sits over the sunken city, leading to danger for sailors. While Bretons may be ethnically Celtic, the story is seen as part of French culture and history, and so it leads to the attraction known as the City of Dis. The entrance facade of the attraction showed the bottom half of a whale sticking out from rockwork, and an adjacent copper porthole showed a mural of the sunken city. On entering the queue, it was dimly lit by blue lights, with glass columns spread throughout that would have bubbles traveling upwards. There is a small clip from a promotional video that seems to show what looks like artificial jellyfish in there as well, but I'm not entirely sure if that's what they're intended to be. On boarding the ride, which was an omnimover, riders moved through an outdoor section that depicted the fall of the city. Soldiers are carved into the columns, which depicts them fighting a hydra that emerges from the water. Behind the hydra is a wooden structure, which might be a ship, but I think is instead the gates to the levee, which I initially thought implied that the king's daughter is the monster who intends to sink the city. It could also not be related to the king's daughter at all, as the dialogue for the attraction describes how the city summoned monsters with a mysterious technology, and refers to witches and sirens who lure ships into the city to be robbed. Also, while the movement was limited, the Hydra did have a small degree of motion, which is pretty cool. After this scene, riders moved through a glass tunnel looking out into a pond, and could view the broken head of a statue, with the dialogue describing it as being from another dimension. Moving into the dark, riders first encounter strange, spindly creatures that brandish claws at riders as if intending to attack them. The vehicle then moves past two more who appear to be fighting each other, and then a final creature who appears to be guarding a nest of eggs located underneath some mysterious structure that may or may not be a sunken ship. Near the first encounter with the crab-like animals, there is a staircase in the rock that is difficult to see, but from a photo, it reveals that it's an infinite staircase effect that reaches up into what I think is supposed to be another dimension. The dialogue for the ride refers to how the city discovered what it calls infinity, which I think is this mysterious dimension that the monsters came from. Moving on though, riders enter what I think is a volcanic cave, filled with ugly creatures that emerge from clamshells. The attraction dialogue refers to a fiery energy that powers the technology in the city, which could be thermal from this red-lit cave, but the translation is also vague enough that I think it could also refer to nuclear fusion. This cave scene also features a terrifying creature that opens and closes its mouth, which I believe could either be another variation of the clam species, or otherwise might be inspired by a gulper eel, which I think is actually more likely. In the dark, there is also what looks to be a person with flashing blue eyes ensnared in some web of tendrils, and from another photo with what appears to be a medieval knight, or possibly even the king, I believe that this section depicts the remains of the city inhabitants. From here, the ride gets stranger, as you see a person ensnared in some sort of technological bubble, as they are surrounded by the crab-like creatures holding glowing stones in their claws. This scene also depicts what I think is the merging of the tangible world with the infinite, making for an abstract and definitely Lovecraftian kind of theme of cosmic horror. Achieved through mirrors and lights, riders now move through a nebulous realm that I think either implies that they're traveling into the infinite, or are otherwise experiencing the dimensions merging together. This continues as the vehicles move through a mirrored tunnel with flashing lights, and emerging, riders now find themselves in an abstract dimension of lights, shapes, and a jellyfish-like creature. It appears to have its tentacles placed on a submerged sphere, which I think may indicate that it's pulling the Earth into the infinite. I could also be wrong, it's just a random shape to help set the abstract nature of the scene, but because there was no dialogue for the second half of the ride, I think that it may have intentionally just been vague for the sake of being mysterious. While there's no footage of the ride past this point, from here I believe it just ends, with you trapped in the infinite with all the horrors that it contains. Unfortunately, Muropolis is not a well-documented park, as it only operated for a 5-year span, from 1987 and through 1991. With the lack of adequate camera technology for low-light environments, it's often very difficult to tell what was occurring throughout the ride, and even then, what little footage has been made available is full of cuts between the scenes, making it impossible to see the entire ride. Granted, I think that cut scenes were just too dark for the camera, so you couldn't see what was going on in these transitions anyways, but it would be really cool if a full video of this ride surfaced. There is also a lot of interpretation going on from my end, as I had to piece together a lot of different elements to try to understand what this ride was designed to convey. There are two different problems with this though. First, there are many different versions of the story of the City of Dees, so I don't know exactly what the ride is pulling from. And second, it seems to go in its own Lovecraftian direction anyways, so I tried to match up what I saw with an audio file from the ride, but the actual translation from French into English is not great, so there's a lot of room for misinterpretation. Even though I tried my best to explain this fascinating ride, there's just not a lot of documentation of it out there, which is also why I didn't cover the other dark ride in the park. Located inside the structure of Gargantua, this ride was known by the same name and was also an omnimover. I believe that the premise of the attraction was that riders literally moved through the body of the avaricious giant, which was depicted as mechanical inside. The body itself was operated by many little figures, as a song guided you through what the different functions of the organs were, and on reaching the top, riders could look out a series of windows and into the park before descending into a few more ride scenes. I don't know if Gargantua was meant to literally be mechanical, or if the stylization of the ride was meant to represent a cartoon version of his inner workings, but either way, it was very strange, and I have no more information to share with you because there just isn't really any documentation of the ride scenes beyond some brief promotional video. At the very least, I wanted to share with you my interpretation of the City of Dees through this video, because it truly was fascinating, even if it was difficult to put together. You would be surprised by how much time and research goes into even a shorter video like this, so if you enjoyed this look at France's strange and Lovecraftian descent into the infinite, you can help me out by just leaving a like to help boost this video. As always though, if you want to see more videos like this, and haven't yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can also do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.